Zen. Tonight's Dharma talk is given by Myung-Jin and San.
I think, therefore, I am scared. There are certain things that the Buddha has said that all beings are afraid of. All beings tremble at the thought of death, for example. That's one of my favorite ones. Just because you can whip it out anytime you need to justify veganism or vegetarianism. But we're all afraid of death in one way or another. When confronted with it, there's a certain revulsion to it, I think. One of my old sanghas, the teacher there once asked, what is it that's the one thing that a human being can't imagine? And the answer was, the world without me in it. Even if you think back to, historical times or whatever, there's always that me floating around, hovering, sort of, looking over everything. The future after we're, supposedly dead. We're still kind of there hovering, looking at the funeral. Say, yeah, that's what they think of me, eh? Ha! Illness. I don't think any of us is really looking forward to getting sick. Right? Sometimes it's more pronounced as a fear than others. There was this thing that started in 2020 that I think warranted a fair amount of legitimate fear. Like, take precautions, maybe you won't get sick kind of thing. The fact that, people died from this thing that started in 2020. Brother-in-law of mine included, sort of, it was time to take evasive action because we fear death. We fear sickness. There's some other things that we fear. They usually involve loss. Loss of loved ones, loss of shelter, food, housing, money in general. It's all drummed into us to be afraid about losing that kind of stuff. And there's also this pervasive, I guess you could call it angst, which is just a crazy German way of saying fear. That there's something going on and we don't know quite what it is, and we don't know quite how it's going to work out. But the 2020s seem to be roaring, growling, and howling a lot more than the roaring 1920s did somehow. And there's that baseline of anxiety, of discomfort. Going back to another old teacher, and I've talked about this before, there's the question, what does a great bodhisattva have to stand on? And of course, when I asked that, I went through the usual litany of noob responses of this shore, that shore, the Dharma, the three jewels, probably a number of other things, none of which were acceptable answers. The acceptable answer was, what does the great bodhisattva have to stand on? Nothing. And that's where we are right now and always. We like to think that the routines and habits that we have give us some sort of comfort, give us some sort of solidity. But that can all change in an instant. We can take refuge in the Buddha, we can take refuge in the Dharma, and we can take refuge in the Sangha. But that's not going to alleviate all the issues that we might have that are based in fear. Avalokiteshvara saw all five skandhas as empty and was saved from suffering and distress. All these things that are providing us with this pervasive angst these days are all subject to causes and conditions, yes? And what characterizes things that are subject to causes and conditions? Shunyata, right? Emptiness. So all these fears we have of all these things are all subject to emptiness. You're characterized by emptiness. They're changing every day from moment to moment, changing. What seemed like the worst thing in the world last week may get trumped by the worst thing in the world next week. We'll look back on that one from a week ago fondly. Say, back in the good old days. And that's not to say that realizing that all these phenomena are empty is necessarily going to provide any solace like that. I own an old home. It's like 125 years old, which in some places in the world is not considered even remotely old. But this one's pretty old. And ever since I've lived here and had to start fixing things, there's always been this baseline, this pervasive, what's going to happen next? I just had 3 chimneys replaced. If you had asked me a year ago, hey, you're going to need some new chimneys. What do you think about that? I said, what? No, you're tripping. So there's that sort of baseline of, yeah, something's going to come up here. I don't know what it is, but I know it will happen. And we can say that about everything. Our entire world is going to need a new roof and new chimneys at some point or another. At some point or another, we're all going to get sick, unemployed, hungry, homeless, some varying degree of any or all of them, except for the death thing. That's pretty much a given. We have nothing to stand on. Waking up at the same time every morning, eating breakfast at the same time every morning, so on and so forth throughout our day may seem somewhat comforting, but oversleep that one morning. Don't have that bread to make toast with. It all sort of unravels. So, back to our friend Avalokiteshvara. The Bodhisattva depends on Prajna Paramita, and the mind is no hindrance. Without any hindrance, no fears exist. Okay, so if you were to extrapolate from that, the mind is the hindrance. Without a hindrance, no fears exist. So, ergo, and since this is a quasi-Cartesian talk anyway, I can use the word ergo, mind creates fear. Our perceptions are the basis of our fears. Like I said, what was seemingly the worst thing in the world last week is now looked upon fondly because there's been something new this week that puts it to shame. Has the event changed any? No. Our perception of it has. The feeling we have about it, maybe even the name we give to it, has changed. The event is the event. Whatever we call it, however we think about it, doesn't matter. The event doesn't care. The event is just the event. And the fact that we try and delineate these events is really kind of arbitrary. I mean, it's like most things don't have an on-off switch, right? Even death doesn't have an on-off switch to it. There's, sort of a slope to it, Some organs might fail, other ones are still going. You could be, quote unquote, brain dead, and the rest of the body is still going. So very few things have this slice between thing and not thing or other thing. So we're creating in our minds entities, things, dharmas that are really kind of fuzzy around the edges. They're not really, very delineated. They're not in little boxes. Now, I know this is all very, very uplifting, and gee, I can't wait to look forward to knowing why I have that pervasive feeling of doom. That's not the point of this talk. The point is that when we see all these things as empty, even if it's just intellectually, even if we have to try and talk ourselves into it, it can bring a bit of relief. It won't make fear necessarily disappear. It won't make the things that cause us to have fear disappear, even though they're empty. It's like, yeah, prove that. What it can do is give you a little perspective. And that's how it's worked with me with this house, is that, yeah, I know the shoe is going to drop. I know something's going to happen. But because I know something's going to happen, it gives me a little bit of solace and a little preparation, you might even say. It kind of smooths things out a little bit to the point where I can have some degree of equanimity about it. It's like, I know the other shoe is going to drop. Shoe drops. Okay. Didn't know what it was going to be specifically, but I knew it was going to happen. So I'm not like manic and frantic and panicking, hair on fire. We have nothing to stand on. There is no solid ground. There never is, there never was, there never will be. What's the one thing we can count on? Is that everyone else has that same waiting for the other shoe to drop, pervasive fear, angst, discomfort, and our job is to help them get through that. I think, therefore, I am maybe not as scared as I previously was.